Despite harsh weather, time shortage, and the pressure to return to the fight, Ukrainian pilots and technicians are going through intense training at the Skrydstrup base in Denmark.
Well, combat experience is a thing that is really hard to overestimate, but still it is a really condensed program. I think the biggest boost here is not that combat experience, but the motivation to go back and keep fighting. It is really super fun jet to fly. I'm not saying that MiG that I flew before is super boring, but the F-16 is definitely more agile. It feels like the jet wants you to fly it more aggressively.
The F-16 is highly complex. Ukraine has never had access to such an advanced system. It's an immense challenge for the technicians who will be responsible for the jet's maintenance.
Спочатку, як ми тільки знайомилися з цією системою, вона нам здавалася незрозумілою і нереальною до інтегрування в Україні. Але зараз я розумію, що це дуже спрощує роботу, економить час. Це дійсно варте того, щоб ми просувалися вперед. Якщо ми хочемо розвиватися як країна, як структура в повітряних силах, ми повинні черпати цей досвід в різних країнах, які вже давно переступили цей етап.
For Ukraine, the F-16 is crucial, especially now, as Russia is intensifying its attacks. With the F-16, the pilots will keep enemy aviation from Ukraine's borders, minimizing the threat of glide bombs on civilians and soldiers alike. The F-16s will make Ukraine stronger, and Ukraine is grateful to the coalition for coming together to help Ukraine secure its sky.
Even if we were both European countries, there's a big difference between our cultures, and I think both sides learned a lot from that and made good friendships. We are in this together.
In July 2023, Ukraine and several other countries have formed the so-called F-16 coalition. The coalition is led by the United States, Denmark and the Netherlands. Other members include Norway, the United Kingdom, Greece, Luxembourg, Canada, Poland, France, Romania, Belgium, Portugal and Sweden. The coalition is working on the transfer of aircraft, training of pilots and maintenance personnel, and preparation of infrastructure.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the channel. Lucille, thank you very much for chiming in already. Glad to see you. I've got a lot of things to go through today and not a lot of time to do it, so I'm going to be going through a lot of stuff in a hurry. However, I would absolutely still love it if you would pipe in with your questions or comments, because I will be reading them and paying attention as I go. So let's go ahead and get started on some of the biggest news out of the last, a day or so in Ukraine, because it's been about a day and a half since my last stream. We'll start off with something a little bit lower. I hate to say it this way, a little bit less important. However, Iran's arms sales are really picking up to Russia here. Iranian sources, according to the Institute for the Study of War, told Reuters on February 21st that Iran provided hundreds of short-range ballistic missiles to Russia in early January. They're not specified as to exactly which types, although I've seen other sources indicating probably up to around 700 kilometers. Iran's arms sales to Russia are part of Iran's efforts to generate revenue to support its own deteriorating economy. Iran's been suffering a lot under the sanctions that they've been having. That's not stopped them from supplying and outfitting people like the Houthis and now Russia as well. They've really made sanctions evasion into an art form. So really interesting to see that how that's going. The large number of missiles, it sounds like there's about 400 of them, and include many from the Fatah 110 family of short-range ballistic weapons, according to the Kiev Independent. That's the ones with the range of up to 700 kilometers. The next big news, by the way, we've got some really big news in just a moment here, but the next one, while we're kind of waiting for things to settle in. Hi, Jerry. Glad to have you on board. Russia is using freshly produced shells as supply running smoothly, according to a Ukrainian officer. They're seeing new production shells from 2022 and 2023 coming in from the Russian side. And Ukraine is, of course, suffering a critical shortage of artillery shells themselves. A lot of this is due to Western aid not showing up, the Europeans not ramping up their production very quickly to deal with a war situation on the European continent. It's overall just a bad situation for Ukraine as of today, and we'll be seeing a lot of those effects as we get into the front lines later on. Canada, however, if you may recall, I believe it was the last video, Czechia's gotten line on a bunch of artillery shells. Those shells are becoming from third countries, particularly it sounds like South Korea and some southern African countries, though they don't specify which ones. Canada's ponying up to help Czechia pick up those shells to send to Ukraine. They've ponied up $30 million, and I believe there are a few others that have also reported adding some money to that particular pot. Now, the big news from today is actually just coming in as I was preparing this research for today's video. Another A-50 has been shot down over the Azov Sea. Now, the A-50 is Russia's premier AWACS aircraft. It's the one that lets them see missiles incoming and be able to coordinate their intercepts of enemy fighters and any of those types of things. So this is a vital asset to Russia. Before the start of the war, they only had 10 of them, though not necessarily all in operational condition. One of them was heavily damaged on a runway, an apron in Belarus. One was shot down last month, I believe. And now another one was shot down in a suspiciously similar situation, though this one's got a few extra caveats attached, which makes it extra interesting. This video shows that there was apparently 2 missiles. The A-50 was dropping flares to try and avoid the missiles, which indicates that the aircraft saw the attack coming. They knew they were under attack. They were dropping flares, and it's actually gone on to the fire itself at this point. So they knew they were under attack. They knew it was coming in. The pilot was dropping flares like crazy, trying to get away. And one of the missiles went for the flare. The second one went for the plane itself. A large fire was triggered at Trudovaya, Armenia, in a farm, and they end up having to localize it with a fairly large fire suppression crew there. It looks like they've started, the Russians kind of been prevaricating on this initially, but it looks like this is that A-50. They also report a second air vehicle. Some people said it might be the accompanying aircraft that usually goes with it. Others said it was a drone. The Russians said it was a drone, in fact, that came in at the same time. Right in the same area. Either way, the A-50 is pretty much confirmed. And I'm going to kind of quickly skip through a bunch of these because they're all repeating basically the same information. The Ukrainians took credit for the shoot down, and the plane actually crashed in the Krasnodar region near the village of the Trudovaya, Armenia. Which, if we take a look at the deep state map here, just to kind of get a reference here, let's back this out. That'd be right about in this area. Boop, hang on. Okay, let's see. Good. My head's not in the way. Great. That'd be about into this area right in here, which is where it went down. We'll see some maps of that later. But look at how far they had to go, basically entirely over all of the occupied territories in Ukraine. They had to go right over any air defenses, Mariupol, everything that was be working in this area in order to hit this aircraft, this A-50, right over and near the Azov Sea. That's quite a ways to go. I don't know if I can measure. Yes, I can measure a distance on this one. Hang on a second. So 147, almost 150 kilometers from the closest point to roughly the area that aircraft was intercepted at. That is quite a long-range shot. Now, of course, there was a hilarious post where somebody showed a raft with a Patriot launcher sitting on top of it. Like, oh yeah, the Ukrainians have put a raft into the Azov Sea with a Patriot launcher on it. But either way, that's a pretty long distance, and that's assuming they were firing from right on the front lines. An unusual place for Ukraine to put their air defense systems, at least not of this caliber and size. Let's go ahead and get back to some of the details here. Here's the report from Baza, so showing that it was 2 aircraft that were shot down, one the plane itself, one a drone. They didn't at the time know what the second aircraft was. This is kind of video of the fire itself from a long distance. There is some that's a bit closer, so I'll get to that in just a moment here. This is, of course, a valuable asset for the Russians. Not only is there the plane itself, which is effectively irreplaceable. The last ones were built in 1992, so they would have to design a whole new aircraft to carry out this task effectively. But there's the crew involved. I believe it's between 12 and 16 guys on there, and the highest trained one requires a 5-year an engineering degree and a lot of training and all that kind of stuff. This is a crew that is not easy to replace, and that they've lost 2 of them so far. Now, like I said at the start, they originally had 10 of these aircraft at the start of the war. 1 was destroyed in Belarus, 2 over the Azov Sea now. The other 7 are in various states of unknown readiness. The odds are they have 1 or 2 at least fully operational, at least by the percentages. But the others have not been seen in the air in quite some time. Are they entirely unoperational? Are they partially capable? Can they cannibalize one to repair the others? We just don't know. But this is an enormous asset that they're losing. This is the the route of the aircraft itself. Looks like it was taking off from somewhere around Rostov-on-Don and was circulating through this kind of a patrol run, and to finally end up having to divert and crashed just a short distance off of its patrol route here. Here's a closer video of the fire from that attack. Now, understand, I don't have this video confirmed. It's just reported, so be prepared, since we're right in the first hours after this, that some of these videos may not show the actual event itself. So just keep that in mind, that there could be some issues with that. However, I've seen enough videos reporting similar with these same videos. Hang on a second. With these same videos to believe that they are likely to be accurate to this event. A closer video of the actual shoot down itself. Now, OSN Technical says there's 2 possible options. You see, the Russians have already said it's their own system shooting these down. Considering the aircraft is literally there to coordinate air defense, as well as to bring assets to bear against, well, enemy aircraft, that would mean they're coordinating their own shoot down. So there could be a Russian SAM battery operating near the Sea of Azov that is treating Russian aircraft as enemy targets. Or Ukrainian air defenses are now able to down aircraft operating roughly 200 kilometers behind the front. So that's an interesting couple of takeaways from this. By the way, here's another view of this crash site on a more familiar style of like Google map here. You can see where it went down, and that patrol route was roughly in this area as well, if you can see my mouse pointer. This video shows some of the remnants of the aircraft, apparently, at least as they report. I am not well enough versed on this particular aircraft to make any call on whether this is a part of a wing from an A-50 or looks like maybe possibly a stabilizer. I'm not sure. Maybe a horizontal or vertical stabilizer. Linkage unit, it says. So I'm not familiar enough. This is a chunk of whatever it was, either ripped off the end or ripped off the plane itself. A lot of possibilities, don't know, but that's the report that we have. Really interesting to see. Of course, this is the good news for Ukraine. There's going to be plenty of bad news as we get into the video here. There is one question that continually comes up, though. Where is Abrams? Defense of Ukraine has provided a video of the Abrams in action. Let me get this kind of pulled up a little larger here. Now, this looks like, you can see there's UAVs. This looks like it's an operational condition here. They're actually using the Abrams in combat in the field now, as opposed to keeping it in a training role. That's quite the change. It means that the conditions right now are good enough that they're able to. Now, if they end up in mud season again soon, which they will pretty quick, the Abrams will probably be ineffective once again just because of its sheer weight and the track ground pressure. But overall, we're seeing the Abrams actually showing up on the battlefield, and we'll be looking forward to seeing some actual footage of it in operation as well, actually taking out targets. Let's go ahead and move on to news out of Ukraine. Now, I apologize, some of these things are refreshing, and I have some duplicates in here, I'm sure, so be prepared for me to quickly skip through some of them. Over 14 million Ukrainians were forced to flee due to the Russian invasion, according to the UN. This is nearly a third of Ukraine's population, and it's going to be a real problem getting them all to come home, because a lot of them are going to probably establish new lives in places that are a little bit farther away from Russia's aggression. And that is assuming, of course, that they're able to finish this war out. The Ukrainians have signed an order stating that foreigners and stateless persons will be allowed to serve in Ukraine's National Guard. That was signed just the other day, and it gives them an additional option, kind of similar, I think, to the Foreign Legion that the French Foreign Legion kind of set up, where they could bring in outside people, and if you served there for a certain amount of time faithfully, you would be released as a French citizen. I don't know if that's the case, but they will be allowed to at least bring those people into their National Guard. Now let's talk about something that is not good news, and that is the continuing Polish farmer border strike, which has shut down the border between Ukraine and Poland. Zelensky and his group of Ukrainian ministers went to the border to see what was going on, and they were there in case the Polish officials wanted to talk. My understanding is that the Polish officials had already told them they weren't going to be able to be there at this point in time, so it was no expectation that they would be there, but it was an opportunity as they did. Ukrainian farmers, on their part, brought the broken and burned out agricultural equipment that was been destroyed by the Russian army right up to the border with Poland to show them exactly how hard they work to extract every kernel of grain from their land. It's really rough. Of course, there was another dumping of cargo, this time a grain, I believe it's called rapeseed, which I hate to use that word on YouTube, but this one was, once again, these are all transiting to Germany. None of this grain and these agricultural products are staying in Poland. If anything, they ought to be looking at Russia, who they get 3 to 4 times the grain from at this point in time. A new survey says that 40% of Ukrainians believe victory will come in 1 to 2 years, though this is a drop from previous surveys, and the number of I don't knows has been increasing. This was an interesting article I want to just kind of bring up, the reason behind Commander Zaluzhny's dismissal. And I'm going to briefly kind of veer off for a moment here. I've been looking into a lot of what's going on here and watching a lot of opinions from people that I trust, that I generally trust, that are more military than I am, which I'm not. So that should tell you all that. The consensus I'm seeing is that the conditions in 2022 are not the conditions in 2024. Zaluzhny modernized, brought the military up to current, did the initial plans to get Russia pushed back from Kiev, did the initial plans to get the initial captures of Kherson and the other. I thought I wouldn't forget that one, but it'll come to me later, I'm sure. But anyway, managed the initial recapturing of large swaths of territory. Now that the war has gone into a new phase, one that's going to be tougher in some ways and just different in others. And so Zelensky went to Zaluzhny and he said, The leadership needed a reboot, a restructuring, and a change of military command management. We have to be quicker, he said. That means losing all the bureaucracy that we have. Otherwise, we will not have any chance. We have to be quicker. That means, okay, we have to be smart. We are more technologically equipped. And of course, quick. Time is money. And in our case, it's not money. It's people. People's lives. Ukraine's defense forces have received an additional batch of M113 armored personnel carriers, specifically set up to evacuate wounded from the battlefield. So that's a useful addition for Ukraine there. Already talked about that. Skip on. Now, Budanov put this out there, and I have no reason to disbelieve that because it certainly fits with Russia's current method of operation here. He has warned that Russia is activating a plan to kill famous Ukrainians. For instance, Petro Poroshenko was tipped off by Budanov to a Russian assassination attempt, and that's why the trip abroad was canceled. So we're looking at a situation where it's gone into deliberate targeted assassination of Ukrainian famous individuals. People who are not necessarily directly on the front lines or not generals or anything like that, but people who are staunchly pro-Ukrainian and have a high profile. So that's something to keep in mind out for, because remember that Russian helicopter pilot that defected, he was killed. And there was a potential assassination attempt on Petro Poroshenko. There's going to be more. And we know there were a ton against Zelensky himself. This will not be good news for most people who are watching, though I'm certain that some will probably take it as good news. According to Budanov, Ukraine will be able to go on a counteroffensive in 2025. And that's if they have sufficient support from partners and continue to hold the defense this year. Now, a lot of people want this war to be over and want it to be over fast. I will point out that World War II was not over fast. That by the time the U.S. was attacked at Pearl Harbor in 1941, it had been several years of warfare. On top of that, it was from 1941 to I believe it was 1945 or 1944. I'm going to have to look up my dates now. Before the, I'm pretty sure it's 1945. 1944. All right, doesn't matter. It was several years before the landings at D-Day happened. And in the time intervening, there was a tremendous amount of combat going on. There was the Africa campaigns. There was the war in the Pacific. There was all these other aspects that had to be taken care of, not to mention resupplying Britain to keep them in the fight, not to mention Lend-Lease to Russia to keep them in the fight after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact fell apart. The overall situation took years to resolve, and this is the largest land war we've seen in Europe since the end of World War II. And it's not going to get prettier. Moving on to news out of Russia. The occupiers, meaning the Russians, detained the journalist and human rights defender Lyudmila Zudieva. They raided her house at approximately 6 a.m. And let me see if I can get a translation on the rest of this to give you some more context. She's a journalist who's been speaking out against the Russians' activities in Ukraine. So that's the type of government that is in Russia, that they are arresting genuine journalists and human rights defenders and intimidating them to silence. This defense intelligence update, I think, is important for a couple of reasons. Let me read it to you real quick, and then I'll discuss the importance of it here. On February 14th, 2024, Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov told journalists that while the special military operation began as an operation against Ukraine, Over time, it has taken on the form of a war against the collective West, a war when the countries of the collective West, led by the United States, are directly involved in this conflict. This is broadly consistent, says the UK, with a trend in Russian official rhetoric that seeks to excuse the length of the conflict and scale of Russian losses through the depiction of the war as a direct conflict with the West. Peskov went on to acknowledge that the special military operation may last a bit longer, but he says this can't change the course of things. This forms part of Russia's official narrative, almost certainly aimed at situating the domestic population for a long-term conflict and the associated decline in domestic living standards, while providing reassurance of ultimate Russian victory. This is a reframing of the war, because Russia has been at war with the West since Georgia, since Chechnya, since 2014, the capture of Crimea. They have been at war with the West for a long time, and the West has finally decided to acknowledge it. They've been ignoring it for a long time. The question is, will the West as a whole actually deliver on giving them the Russians the bloody eye, the bloody lip, that will tell them that they're not welcome to capture land by force? Kazman says, my take on how Russia took Avdiivka and their plan next. Avdiivka, quickly kind of just summarizing here. In fact, let's do this here. Avdiivka was a place that Russia had been trying to capture for a very long time. It was directly involved in serious contests since October last year. They poured untold numbers of men and resources into taking that city. The thing is that in order to do it, they effectively flattened it. And even then, the way they finally took the city, from what I've read of reports, is they would assault with small groups of men. 20 men would assault, and 3 of them would get to a secure position, someplace that they could hide from drones, and then could get underneath something that they had solid cover. Then they do another assault, same place, same MO, the same everything. 20 guys assault in, 2 of them might get through, get into that same spot. They do it with another 20 guys and another 20 guys. And when they finally get 20 guys into that spot, they'd assault forward, trying to get 2 guys into the next spot and the next spot. It was a tremendously wasteful assaulting method to finally take Avdiivka, because Ukraine put up the most robust defense that they could in the situation. Russia has now tried to engage in broad attacks across all of the front lines, mainly so, I believe, so that they can secure their wins at Avdiivka. They would love to capture more territory. They're hoping they will. But the main purpose is to tie up as many Ukrainian resources to prevent them from mustering a true counterattack back into Avdiivka. I don't think they were at risk of that anyway, because the Ukrainians are now in defensive posture. They're not doing those types of assaults. They do occasionally capture territory from what appears to be opportunistic reasons, as in they just happen to have an opportunity where the Russians aren't looking, and so they jump in there and capture that territory. But overall, that's the way Russia did it, and I believe their current goal is to keep a broad offensive going long enough to prevent Ukraine from reinforcing and potentially stabilizing other parts of that part of the front. The interesting part about it, and their long-term plan obviously, is to gobble a little bit at a time. They want to present the war as an inevitable Russian victory. And I have spoken with some very good friends who believe that Russia's eventual victory is inevitable, that there's nothing we can do and there's nothing we can change. And I don't truck with that. This is the United States. If we have the political will, if we have the desire, and if we can overcome opposition, we can kick Russia clean out of Ukraine. And we don't have to invest any people in it. We just have to put in so much high-tech hardware that Russia can never actually compete. But that requires us to be unified in the United States. But their plan is to divide. Russia wants to divide Europe. They want to divide Poland from the European Union. They want to divide Moldova from Transnistria. They want to divide the U.S. in half so that all of their biggest enemies will be destroyed at the end in a divide and conquer strategy. Similarly with Ukraine, if they can divide all of the people supporting Ukraine, they can take Ukraine eventually. It will still require a tremendous amount of blood. There'll be a partisan movement, an uprising that'll be constant in Ukraine. But eventually they can take that territory if the West, if the European Union, and if the United States end up divided against each other and do not provide that support. So that's their overall plan. More tactically, they want to kick the people out of Krinky if they can. I expect we'll see more at Kupiansk. Kharkiv, that's what it was. That was the area that Ukraine retook. But they're going to be putting a lot of their focus on Kupiansk and trying to take more territory there, and Krinky, because I believe those are the most obvious areas to the Russians where they think that they can get the most upper hand. And that's my thoughts. Oh, I just skipped over what I was going to talk about here, which is a fleet of Russian tanks were spotted at a Crimean train station. T-62 tanks, 30 of them. This is how they're outfitting their tank units now. They have a low rate of T-90 production that they're putting out. They're refurbishing T-80 tanks at a low rate as well. Now they're busting out T-62s and T-55s and outfitting their units with these tanks as well. And if all you need is a gun and some armor on the battlefield, these will do exactly that, especially since by and large, most of the combat is not tank on tank. It's drone on tank, it's, bomb on tank, it's mine on tank, or vice versa. It's very rarely is it actually a tank engaging a tank. Even the Bradley engaging the tank was an unusual thing happening that caught, I think, everybody in that encounter by surprise. Another Russian bomber has dropped more bombs on Russian territory. This is the 8th time since just January 1st. A Fab 250 was found in the Belgorod region in the village of Soloti. 150 residents were evacuated so they could disarm the bomb. Under Putin, according to Crimean Wind, people began to be tried for espionage and disclosure of state secrets more often than in the USSR during the Cold War. They're getting paranoid. Kazman, I hope that answered your question. If you have additional, please go ahead and ask. I hope I addressed what you wanted to hear and wanted to understand. If there's some additional, let me know. Absolutely. They're getting more paranoid in Russia. They're literally returning to their Cold War mentality and then some. It's like aggressively Cold War mentality. Now I'm going to talk about what I'm calling the Ruski Mir. If I come up with this type of material on a regular basis, it's going to be a little bit of a segment overall. So this section is particularly about how Russia basically reveals who they really are and their real intentions. This is coming from Dmitry Medvedev. He says, Kiev is a Russian city ruled by an international brigade of opponents of Russia. He also added that he did not know where the Russian troops would stop. He also called to Odessa and said, "Come home." They clearly intend to continue through Ukraine. They're already agitating in Transnistria. They're agitating in Poland. Speaking of Poland, Russian propagandist Solovyev said, "Do the Poles want to be next? They are not Ukrainians. We will not treat them like brothers." Side note, if this is how they treat their brothers, I think it's time to leave that family. "We'll bloody destroy all those cities in an instant without using ground troops. It's Ukraine we feel sorry for, but there in Poland, we'll fight like the Americans in Iraq. We'll simply, I am not sure about nuclear strikes, but with missile strikes and air strikes, I am sure we will just freaking destroy them. And we won't even think twice." Then there was this little bit of information from Steve Rosenberg where he gave his opinion and said, after 2 years of war, are Vladimir Putin's goals any clearer? One view is that he needs Ukraine, but this is not enough for him. What is enough? That this world must accept his rules. It's not about Ukraine then. It's about insisting that Russia was right and that Russia's dictates are the ones that matter in the world. That's the reason the nuclear threats happen. That's the reason they constantly are threatening the Poles, the Europeans, everybody, because they want them all to pay obeisance to them. They want their blind obedience. They want to subjugate the world to their will, even if they don't have to capture the territory. They want everybody to look to Russia and follow their lead. And that was my little bit on the Ruski Mir today. I'm going to take a brief pause to get a little drink of water here. If you have any questions, now's a good time to pop them in as well. And overall, that's the situation as far as we see it on the Ruski Mir on that part there. If you do have, just chime in, let me know you're here. Absolutely pipe up and let me know what you're thinking about, your questions, or even just say hello. I appreciate that as well. Let's move on to the international front. And man, my heavens, there is a lot of news on the international front. So let's go ahead and get right into it. U.S. has unveiled new charges and arrests in 5 separate cases of Russian oligarchs and their facilitators. This would be people who are helping Russia to evade sanctions and things like that. From Poland, in these days and weeks, the fate of Ukraine hangs in the balance. And I don't need to convince you that our fate hangs in the balance as well. Any such attack in public space supporting Putin's narratives is high treason. He was talking about the provocations at the border. The rhetoric is amplifying. The lines are being drawn. And the world is starting to see. The Right Honorable Grant Shapps from the UK says they're going to give a package of 200 Brimstone anti-tank missiles to Ukraine, and since those have already had quite an impact, they're going to give them even more. Latvia is leading the way on this one. They've become the first EU country to ban imports of grain from Russia and Belarus. Latvian president argued that Russian grain imports support the Russian economy and therefore its army. Right now, the Russian economy is all in on supporting the war effort. Denmark has signed a 10-year security agreement with Ukraine, said the Danish Prime Minister. If we don't stand together, Ukraine won't stand, and potentially Europe won't either. Italy is also set to sign a security agreement with Ukraine, though that's going to be coming up in the coming days. New Zealand is ponying up $26 million in an aid package for Ukraine. This is for defense and humanitarian aid. Interesting to see, and that brings the total value of New Zealand's assistance to over $100 million. Lithuania is to close 2 more border crossings with Belarus. There have been a lot of provocations there. They've been kind of throwing migrants at them to try and overwhelm the system in Lithuania. They were doing the same thing to up north as well. So they're shutting down their crossing points. Denmark is announcing another $247 million aid package for ammunition, drone equipment, and other things. The Biden administration has announced 500 new sanctions on Russia ahead of the Ukraine war anniversary. This is specifically to address the killing of Alexei Navalny. So overall, it'll have the same end result, but a lot of these are more targeted at individuals. They actually called them, I think, targeted at Putin himself. European Union has also adopted the 13th package of sanctions, which include 106 individuals and 88 legal entities. Already talked about that. And here's an interesting thing coming out of Germany. They had a bill in their legislative equivalent that was talking about providing long-range missiles to Ukraine. That one did not get through, but another one was just adopted by the Bundestag. That actually includes, apparently, a provision for long-range missiles, the Taurus long-range missiles. This is a coalition document, unlike the opposition one. The previous one was entirely put up by the opposition group, the opposition party, and that's, I believe, why it was rejected. A little bit of politics going on there, a little bit of we've got to get together and create a unified front on this, as opposed to a you versus me type arrangement. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, said that maybe F-16s that are going to Ukraine could be used to strike military targets inside Russia. Just maybe. These are effective jets that hinge on pilot training and crew readiness. The video at the start, at the start of the countdown, that one kind of addressed a lot of that. The maintainer there talked about how complicated the jet was. A lot of people were, especially Ukrainians, were like, it's a jet, give us the jet, we will take it into battle. And if they did exactly that, they would get exactly the same performance out of it as they would their MiGs. But if they come through fully trained, fully current on all the Western systems that jet can provide, they will bring new capabilities to the battlefield that will make big differences in how the war is fought. So just handing them the jets would not have been enough. In fact, we'd have seen, seen reports of S-16s getting shot down and all that kind of thing, much like we see occasional reports of MiGs getting shot down. So don't treat it like a MiG, and you'll get way better performance out of it. New Zealand has announced I already mentioned that one. Yep. A group of legal experts has said that it is legal to seize Russian assets and use them to help out Ukraine. Interesting to see that coming out of Bloomberg, and we'll see if that stands up. A little bit of a funny aside here. Lavrov was refused refueling in Brazil. Hi, Ozzy. Glad to have you here. This would be practically early for you at this point, I would think. Or I guess it would be early morning for you at this point. Or would it? You let me know about what time of day it is for you. Anyway, Lavrov, he was supposed to go to Brazil for a meeting over there, a G20 meeting. But the Brazilian maintainers said that, no, we will not refuel your plane, because if we do, we stand the risk of invoking U.S. sanctions against us. So he ended up flying on the plane of the Brazilian foreign minister instead. And it sounds like they're going to fly it back after they refuel the plane someplace else. So interesting to see them. They're really having to really finagle things to get around those sanctions these days. This is from Russian source Rybar. It's talking about, he calls it the NATO railway for the war with Russia, which, of course, from their perspective, that's exactly how they'd feel about it. This is part of the military Schengen zone that they're working on creating over in the European Union, where they can rapidly move military equipment from all the way through the European Union to the front lines, as opposed to having to stop at each border and make arrangements and get through everything. Jump on the rail line, get all the way to the front lines with your equipment and manpower, and get to fighting. So they're watching this with a great deal of interest, and something that we're going to have to pay attention to as well. And that's the news on the international front. I'm going to pause for a second here before I jump onto the front lines. Let me know what you're thinking about any of this news. The F-16s, the bit with Lavrov, even the Abrams tank video, so you kind of know that those things are actually getting used, or the A-50 shoot down. Just pipe in. Let me know. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. This is a little less organized than normal for me here, so bear with me a little bit. I'll try to keep it as neat and tidy as I can. A lot of pressure in the Lyman-Kupiansk area, fierce battles. There, according to a military spokesman for Ukraine, things are very difficult now. So we're looking at some pretty rough stuff going on up here. Let's go ahead and refresh the map and see if there's any new information on the Deep State map before we continue on. Okay, Ivanovsky, Severne, and on the east of Orlivka. But they were pushed back in Pobeda. Let's go and take a look at Pobeda first. Get the good news out of the way. This is south of Marinka. Okay, gotcha. Now I'm getting current here. Originally, they showed the Russians had captured all of this little village here, and now it looks like the Ukrainians have managed to push them back. I don't think there's much to speak of in this village. Let me flip it over to a satellite view real fast. Yeah, a couple of dozen houses. So not a whole lot here, but still, it's another place they're going to end up fighting for. Over in Ivanivsky, come on, close that. Let's pull that out a little bit. This would be near Bakhmut. The Russians have managed to make some progress here. Let's go ahead and pop that back and see what kind of a change it is. That's pretty significant there. That's getting into the outskirts of this town and starting to take on the center of it. If they don't have the right number of equipment and the ammunition, this will be falling in short order. This one's a big one right here, this change near Avdiivka. The Russians have taken all the way near to Severne and are reporting there on the outskirts of the town itself. This whole area, they've set up some new front lines, some new defensive positions. I don't know exactly where they are. I do know that the Russians have been pushed back at Listochkiny, right here on the north end here. So I imagine the line is somewhere along in here, trying to stabilize the front lines. The next possible one I would see is possibly along in here, a little bit farther back from that. But we'll have to see what the results are as Russia continues their assault through this area. Another successful HIMARS strike, this time on a training ground near Podokalinovka. They were doing a training there. I believe they'd gathered all the troops once again. And, of course, HIMARS paid a visit. So it's getting to be a bit of a pattern lately that Russia's getting overconfident. They're getting smacked down. And I'm sure that, that eventually they'll stop doing this gathering until they start doing it again. Here's a Starlink terminal, you know, the ones that Elon Musk has said he's not providing to Russia. And, of course, the Ukrainians blew it up with a drone because the Russians were using it. A Russian ammunition depot was taken out in the Zaporizhia area. I believe this is, going from memory, I believe it was the Verbova-Robotna area, but I'm not sure. Either way, that's one more ammunition depot up in smoke. Already talked about that briefly real quick here. Now, this is a weird one. I'm going to go ahead and bring this in so you can read it along with me here. 2 Iranian Mohajer 6 UAVs are patrolling in the area of Zmini Island, which is Snake Island, and directing suicide bombers that fly from the sea. that would indicate that Iran is providing more equipment, more high-tech equipment, not just their Shahed drones. And providing these and allowing them to patrol near Snake Island means that it's going to be a problem for Ukraine. It's kind of rough there. A little bit more information on that strike on military personnel. That was actually near Krinky. Hold on. Back up a second here. Yeah, that was actually near Krinky in a training ground there, so that kind of gives me a little bit more context on it. The situation in Krinky is ever-changing and a tough one right there. Russian channels claim that attacks on Ukrainian-held Krasnohorivka have started and that Russian units have managed to advance into the settlement. According to null reports, those are not yet confirmed, so we'll need to watch this situation as it develops. And we already kind of addressed some of this here in Bakhmut Ivanivsky, so some of this is not new information, but we can see this is an ever-changing situation on the front lines, even near Bakhmut. Overall, we've got a situation where Ukrainians are on the back foot right now. They're definitely being pushed back by Russian forces in places where Russia's able to gain a significant amount of material and manpower superiority. So we're going to have to watch this one as it goes. It's going to be a rough little while. Whenever you're on defense, you're going to be more likely to lose territory a little bit at a time. But on defense, you are much more capable when it comes to destroying attackers who are leaving their cover in order to come and attack you. It's going to be a rough year, but let's keep an eye on it and hope that we can keep it going. I spoke briefly about Transnistria, though. Let's go ahead and take a look right here. According to Crimean Wind, and I've seen this several other places as well, on February 28th, Transnistria may turn to the Russian Federation with a request to join it. And the idea would be to say, kind of like they did with the annexation of Crimea, they're going to try and set up a little referendum thing or whatever they're going to do and eventually just become part of Russia, kind of like a Kaliningrad, except for Transnistria. This is basically a formalization of the situation that's already been there. Now, if you remember properly here, Transnistria, let me see if I can get it on this map here, just for reference here. Right here, this area right here on the Moldovan border, that's Transnistria. Russia's got maybe 1,600 troops there. They're hard to resupply. And if they actually join into this, if they actually join the Russian Federation, doesn't that mean that automatically that area is no longer off limits? Just saying. That would mean a hostile power, put the hostile Russian power right there. They don't have enough men or equipment to actually mount a real offense through this area, but it complicates things for the Ukrainians. And the question is, would they then work with the Moldovans? Get that place cleared out and clear off a problem on their back corner? I don't know. There's a lot of things to consider on that one. My specialty is more in the politics, less the warfare, but interesting to watch. And I don't think it will have the effect Russia's hoping for if Transnistria makes it official. And we're going to go into the interesting extras at this point in time. Brett Baier had a sit-down conversation with Zelensky, and somebody put the picture of the interview with Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin down for a contrast. See, this interview with Brett Baier of Fox News happened near a few kilometers from the front lines, I believe in the Kharkiv region, and you can see here, it's a pretty rough situation over there. They're sitting in front of piles of firewood. In fact, they had a fire in this area that they were using to keep warm. There's a large hole in the roof, if you see some of the pictures, which I think I've got a video that'll show that. And this is the difference. One is on the front lines. One is actively protecting his people as best he can, fighting for their freedom. The other one's sitting in an armchair. Armenia is pulled out of the CSTO, and said that Russia basically dominates the organization anyway, and it doesn't look like it's going to be any good for Armenia anyway. The Houthis, now this is outside of the Ukraine war for just a moment. The Houthis have now said that any ship associated with Israel, the U.S., and the UK are now targets, and they are not allowed through the Red Sea. We'll see how that works out for them. There's been a lot of trouble over there in the Red Sea. I don't know if you saw it, but there is a cargo ship that took a tremendous amount of damage. Last I heard, it was still afloat, but down by the stern, nearly to the deck. So any kind of a serious storm might take that thing to the bottom. Funny enough, it was actually loaded full of supplies for Yemen, humanitarian aid. It's getting rough over there. France had an AWACS-style plane doing patrols on the Black Sea, doing some loops around the area, and an irate Russian air traffic controller got on the radio with them and threatened to have them shot down. They're getting aggressive, trying to pull anything they can over on the Black Sea. Ukraine's been very effective on keeping the sea itself clear of most Russian warships, but the skies are still in debate. Russia claimed much of the same thing as this post right here. Ukraine is also claiming it as well now. They've now saying they're developing an anti-thermal imaging poncho for their armed forces. I'll believe it when I actually see it. There's a lot of people that claim they've got the silver bullet when it comes to avoiding thermal imaging detection, and yet in the end it seems like it's always not actually worked very well. We'll see. Another entirely unrelated bit of news here. The Odyssey module has successfully landed on the south pole of the moon. This is the first time in 50 years the United States has returned to the surface of the moon, this time with a commercially designed spacecraft used to get there, along with its probe. So this is coming from BBC Russian, their coverage of the event. Obviously, that was an animated render. You wouldn't get that view from the actual moon surface there. But overall, we're back on the moon. And it'll be interesting to see. They're hoping to have this carry a human cargo to the moon as well in short order. Additional information on that. Talking about the private partnership that was going on, the public-private partnership that actually carried out this landing. Interesting to see. It's really fascinating from a space perspective. I've always been kind of a bit of a space buff. Not a big one, but I love the idea of space travel. I truly do. And we're getting us back into space in this way is important to me. So, talking about how you could destroy the Crimean Bridge, the Kerch Strait Bridge. A single missile won't do it, but a combined strike could be potentially the most effective, according to Crimean Wind. Use Taurus to hit the supports, use ATACMS for repeated impacts after the Taurus, possibly to lead to the collapse of the supports. Use Sea Babies to do attacks from the water, and potentially group ATACMS to deploy air defense systems around the bridge before that main Taurus strike, and then use drones to bait the defenses. They estimate that you'd need 20 to 30 Taurus, 20 ATACMS of the M5 or M57E1 type, 10 ATACMS of the M39A1 type, which I believe is the cluster munitions type, but I'm going from memory on that, and 10 to 20 sea drones to take out the Kerch Strait Bridge. I mentioned earlier the interview with Bret Baier and Zelensky. Well, somebody captured some behind-the-scenes footage here, so let's go ahead and watch that. It's not too long. I believe let me turn the audio on for you here. You can see here, however, there's a cat that decided to wander around the interview here. And you'll see the cat wandering around a bit on the logs in the background and saying hello to the two interviewers and just wandering around enjoying the company, I think, for a little bit. There was a hole in the roof. I mentioned there's another one there. But straight above this spot, that's where they've been building campfires to keep the place warm from the looks of things, at least in this area. But you can see the snow right there on the ground still. So they didn't exactly sit down in a beautiful room and have their conversation in Kiev. All right, Ozzy, glad to see you here. And the sun is just rising and birds have started to sing, he says. Sounds like a gorgeous, absolutely beautiful morning for you. Speaking of absolutely beautiful, I'm going to end off with this super cute puppy in the arms of a Ukrainian soldier. And on that note, if there's nothing else before I close things up, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate you being here. Hit me with that thumbs up if you enjoyed today's stream. Subscribe if you aren't subscribed already. I do appreciate you joining me here. The Ukraine war is important. And the opportunity to bloody the bully and knock him back and stop him has not ended yet. It would have been easier to do a year ago. It would have been easier to do a year and a half ago. But in the end, if we don't stop the bully won't stop. And that's everything. Thanks again. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.